you want to go ahead and put the first slide on the screen, I'll start reading what I'm supposed to read. You are invited to participate in our transportation planning process regardless of your race, color, national origin, including limited English proficiency, religion, creed, gender, ancestry, ethnicity, disability, age, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, veteran status or background. To read the full notice of your rights and protections, visit www.boston-MPO.org/MPO_DISCRIMINATION. All participants will join the meeting with muted microphones. Please rename yourself to include your first name, last name, and affiliation. Please do not unmute or mute yourself. To participate in the discussion, please select the raise hand function. Find this by clicking either on the participants button at the bottom of the screen, and a window will pop up with the raise hand button at the bottom, or the reactions button in the toolbar. The chair will then call on participants. If you're on the phone, you can use *9 to raise your hand. If you have any technical difficulties, please contact Hain Kim via the chat box at hkim@ctps.org or call her at 857-702-3678. This meeting is accessible to people with disabilities. Zoom products are compliant, with exceptions, with the following standards: Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1 Level AA standards and revised Section 508 standards. If you require any additional accommodations in order to participate fully in this meeting, please contact Hain Kim of the MPO staff at hkim@ctps.org or call at 857-702-3678. First item on the agenda is the introductions. John, call the roll, please.
MassDOT Chair.
This is David Mueller from Secretary Tesler.
Thank you. MassDOT C2.
Not seeing John Bouchard yet.
Okay. MassDOT Highway Division.
John Romano here.
Thank you. MBTA. Okay, we'll come back.
Good morning. This is Laura Gilmore for the MBTA.
Thank you, Laura. Massachusetts Port Authority.
This is Sarah Lee for Massport.
Thank you. MAPC.
Good morning, Eric Barassa with the Metropolitan Area Planning Council.
Thank you. MBTA Advisory Board.
Good morning, Brian Kane, MBTA Advisory Board President.
Thank you. Regional Transportation Advisory Council.
Leonard Diggins, Advisory Council here.
Thank you. City of Boston, Boston Transportation Department.
Jen Rowe, representing Mayor Wu.
Thank you. City of Boston, BPDA.
Not seeing Jim Fitzgerald.
Joe Blankenship, I believe, is here in his place.
All right.
Good morning, Joe Blankenship, representing Mayor Wu.
Thank you. At-large city, City of Everett.
Not seeing Eric Molinari.
Should be Jay Monty.
Good morning, Jay Monty, representing Mayor Di Maria in the City of Everett.
Thank you. At-large city, City of Newton.
David Kozas, representing Mayor Ruth Ann Fuller in the City of Newton.
At-large town, Town of Arlington.
This is Daniel Amstutz, representing Select Board Chair Len Diggins in the Town of Arlington.
Thank you. At-large town, Town of Brookline.
Heather Hamilton for the Town of Brookline.
Intercore Committee, City of Somerville.
Good morning, Tom Bent, representing Mayor Katiana Ballantyne, the City of Somerville in the Intercore.
Thank you. Minuteman Advisory Group on Interlocal Coordination, Town of Acton.
I'm not seeing Austin.
Okay. Metro West Regional Collaborative, City of Framingham. Guessing
Not
Dennis.
seeing Dennis
Nothing,
either.
Dennis. Okay. We know that North Shore Task Force will not be represented today by the City of Beverly and Darlene. North Suburban Planning Council, Town of Burlington.
Not seeing Melissa Tadaklos.
Okay. South Shore Coalition, Town of Rockland.
Jen Constable, Town of Rockland for the South Shore Coalition.
Thank you. Southwest Advisory Planning Committee, Town of Medway.
Town of Medway, Pete Pelletier.
Great. We did hear that the the Trick sub-region representatives, both of them will not be available to attend today. So I will go back to Mass DOT C2. I think I see Marie Rose, who might be here for John Bouchard.
Yes, you're correct. Good morning, Marie Rose. For the Highway Division, representing Deputy Chief Engineer John Bouchard.
Thank you, Marie. I'll move to our ex officio members, Federal Highway Administration.
Good morning, Cassie Ostrander.
And Federal Transit Administration.
Good morning, Leah Sermon, FTA.
Great. That calls the roll, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Jonathan. Next item on the agenda is the Chair's report, and I just have a very quick one. MassDOT was the recipient of a RAISE grant of $20.2 million for design and construction of a bidirectional busway on the Linway. In addition, the City of Boston received a $20 million RAISE grant for Roxbury Resilient Transportation Corridors, and the MBTA received a low-no vehicle grant of $116 million from the FTA for the purchase of battery electric buses. This is important to the MPO, not only because we care about projects, but because at some point we will have to determine what years to amend these into the TIP. They are additive. They don't replace any projects. Any questions? Seeing none. Executive Director's report. Tegan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I think I have relatively brief updates today. I'm going to save staffing updates for later on the agenda today because I will be presenting towards the end of the meeting on how the staff's organizational structure has been changing throughout the implementation of our strategic plan, as requested in a prior meeting by an MPO member. So I do have some engagement highlights. First of all, we will have a transit working group virtual coffee chat on Tuesday, August 23rd at 4 p.m. And the guest speaker for that coffee chat will be Chris Van Eycken from Transit Center, and we'll be discussing their new report on the crisis in the bus driver workforce. We're also happy to announce that we've scheduled the next Transit Working Group's quarterly meeting on Tuesday, September 20th at 3 p.m. And the guest speaker for that event will be a team from Transit Ops, which is a nonprofit that works on open source transit technology tech, and Marco Chitty, who's a transit scholar in Montreal, who will speak about that metro area's recent fare integration work. So I think the links to register will be put in the chat. And if you have any questions, as always, you can contact Sandy Johnston, and his email may also be in the chat. And please stay tuned for an announcement for future events. MPO staff are also close to wrapping up our FY22 federal fiscal year 22 UPWP study on our peer MPO practices on transportation demand management, TDM, and whether and how the MPO should engage in that work. So we're pleased to invite any interested stakeholders, including board members or any members of the public, to an open house to hear more about and react to the research findings in that report on Wednesday, August 31st, at 3 p.m. And we'll follow up with that with a presentation to the MPO board on September 15th. So again, we'll provide a link to register for that. And Sandy Johnston is again the contact for questions. And then as a reminder, the 45-day public comment period is underway for the amendment to our public engagement plan. And that amendment proposes allowing the board to waive the 21-day public comment period for UPWP amendments. And that comment period will end on September 4th. And then lastly, as I've discussed in other meetings, we are pursuing the option of a modified Zoom meeting format where we'll be able to make board members co-hosts and give you all the ability to mute and unmute yourselves. So we've been exploring that option, the cost and the procedures that we need to follow. We do believe that it will allow the public to continue to be engaged as they have been and allow us to comply with Robert's Rules of Order. So we will be testing out and trying that new meeting format at the next MPO board meeting, and we'll welcome your feedback on how that's working. So with that, today's agenda items include a vote to endorse the federal fiscal year 2023 UPWP, a vote to endorse the second amendment to the federal fiscal year 22 UPWP, and we'll receive a presentation from Cassie Ostrander and Leah Sermon on the 2022 federal certification review for the Boston Region MPO. And then we'll also get a follow-up presentation from Rebecca Morgan about the MPO's application for Safe Streets and Roads for All discretionary grant to get your approval to actually apply for that grant, which is due in September. And then, as I mentioned, I'll give a presentation on how the structure of the staff of the Boston MPO has been evolving. And then the next MPO meeting will be scheduled for September 1st. And the main highlight will be to vote to endorse Amendment 8 to the federal fiscal year 22 to 26 TIP. And that, Mr. Chair, is all I have for today.
Thank you, Tegan. Any questions for Tegan? Seeing none, next item on the agenda is public comments. Is there anyone from the public who would like to comment at this time? If so, please raise your hand. Seeing none, if you want to comment during the meeting, let us know and we will call in. Committees, chairs, reports. Are there any? Derek Cravat.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a quick update from the UPWP committee, which met this morning. The committee formally recommended that the MPO both endorse the federal fiscal year 2023 Unified Planning Work Program and the federal fiscal year 2022 UPWP amendment, both of which are on the agenda for later today, as Tegan mentioned. More details on those items will be shared later in the meeting. The next UPWP committee meeting is still to be determined based on the need for future UPWP amendments, and staff will be in touch when that date is determined. Finally, just wanted to thank CTPS staff and the UPWP committee members for a successful process this year in developing the draft fiscal year 23 UPWP. And with that, I will hand it back to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Derek. Any questions for Derek? Seeing none, next item on the agenda is Regional Transportation Advisory Council report on Diggins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we had an August meeting, which is unusual for us. And but in that meeting, we did take care of our draft letter. We signed off our draft letter, or our letter for the draft UPWP. And again, we expressed our appreciation for the work that went into the development of the UPWP. And we also had discussed the safe streets and roads for all with Rebecca Morgan, and provide some input that we hope will be helpful as the MPO applies for a grant. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Lynn. Any questions for Lynn? Seeing none. Next item on the agenda is an action item for the approval of the July 7th, 2022 minutes. Can I get a motion and a second from a member, and please state your name for the record? Eric Barassa.
I will make a motion to approve the July 7th MPO meeting minutes.
Brian Kane.
This is Brian Kane. I am always happy to second the motions of Eric Barassa.
Thank you very much, Brian and Eric. Any comments, changes, questions, or suggestions about the minutes? Seeing and hearing none. Jonathan, please call the roll.
David Moeller.
Yes.
Marie Rose.
Yes.
John Romano.
John Romano, yes.
Laura Gilmore.
Laura Gilmore, yes.
Sarah Lee.
Sarah Lee, yes.
Eric Barassa.
Eric Barassa, yes.
Brian Kane.
Brian Kane, yes.
Leonard Diggins.
Leonard Diggins, yes.
Jen Rowe.
Jen Rowe, yes.
Joe Blankenship.
Joe Blankenship, yes.
Jay Monty,
Jay Monty, yes.
David Kozis,
David Kozas, yes.
Daniel Amstutz,
Daniel Amstutz, yes.
Heather Hamilton,
Doesn't seem like Heather's unmuting at the moment.
okay, Tom Bent,
Tom Benton, yes.
and Jennifer Constable,
Jennifer Constable, yes.
and Peter Pelletier.
Heather Hamilton, yes.
Peter Pelletier, yes. Looks like Heather Hamilton also said yes. So motion carries unanimous, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Jonathan. Next item on the agenda is the 2023 Unified Planning Work Program. Randy Johnston.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, folks. So I am here to present the final federal fiscal year 2023 Unified Planning Work Program, or UPWP. On July 21st, this board voted to release the draft FFY 2023 UPWP document for public comment. Today, we're just going to go over briefly the public comments received on the draft document, and then I'll be asking for your vote to endorse this document. As you heard from Derek Gravatt a moment ago, the UPWP committee met earlier today to give their final recommendation to endorse this UPWP and send it to the board here. We received 4 public comments on the draft UPWP. As usual, you can find these in Appendix B of the UPWP, and that's posted on the meeting calendar. There was a comment from MassDOT, the usual checklist to make sure that the document is all in order, minor comments on the text, and we will be addressing any comments from that letter. Lucia Dolan asked about an increase to the support for the MPO, graphics, and professional development budget lines. The 3C committee of the Regional Transportation Advisory Council noted some concerns on the transparency of the development process and the lack of discrete studies relating to the Transit Modernization Funding Program and the Climate Resilience Program. And then we had a letter from the 495 Metro West Partnership, which supported the Learning from Roadway Pricing Experiences study, and noted that they would like to see a revival of the concept for a freight and logistics sector study in the SWAP region. That's a concept that was in the UPWP universe last year. All of the commenters have received an email response from the UPWP manager, Srileka, who is on vacation, which is why I am appearing here today. And as an aside, I am also following up with the 495 Metro West Partnership wearing my freight planning hat. So minor changes have been made throughout the document, notably confirming some budget numbers and ensuring continuity throughout the document, and also adding a map and signage support element to the bus network redesign project in Chapter 5. That is not an MPO funded project, does not affect the budget numbers for the rest of the documents. There's also a number of minor editorial fixes. We're still finding small issues each time we go over the draft, which will all be fixed by the time the document goes up to MassDOT and then to our federal partners for review. So I am happy to take any questions, and if there are none, or once they are answered, we respectfully ask you to vote to endorse the draft federal fiscal year 2023 UPWP.
Thank you, Sandy. Questions for Sandy? Lynn Diggins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And in light of my comments earlier, I just want to make it really clear that the advisory council really appreciates the overall process by which the UPWP was developed, especially the number of meetings that staff had with the advisory council. Our primary issue with respect to the transparency of the process relates to discrete studies, and how we went from the universe, to the studies that was brought to the UPWP committee for selection. So I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any questions? Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, can I get a motion and a second to approve as presented today? And please state your name for the record. Eric Barraza.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll make a motion to approve the federal fiscal year 2023 UPWP.
Lynn Diggins.
Leonard Diggins seconds the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Motion has been made and seconded. Please call the roll, Jonathan.
David Moeller,
Yes.
Marie Rose,
Yes.
John Romano,
John Romano, yes.
Laura Gilmore,
Laura Gilmore, yes.
Sarah Lee,
Sarah Lee, yes.
Eric Barassa,
Eric Barassa, yes.
Brian Kane,
Brian Kane, yes.
Leonard Diggins,
Leonard Diggins, yes.
Jen Rowe,
Jen Rowe, yes.
Joe Blankenship,
Joe Blankenship, yes.
Jay Monty,
Jay Monty, yes.
David Kozis,
David Kozis, yes.
Daniel Amstutz,
Daniel Amstutz, yes.
Heather Hamilton,
Heather Hamilton, yes.
Tom Bent,
Tom Bent, yes.
Jennifer Constable,
Jennifer Constable, yes.
and Peter Pelletier.
Peter Pelletier, yes.
Motion carries unanimous, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, John. Next item on the agenda is an amendment number 2 to the 2022 UPWP. Sandy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Sri Lanka not having returned from vacation since the last item, I am here again to ask for you to endorse amendment number 2 to the current federal fiscal year 2022 UPWP. You voted to release this for public comment on July 21st. Just going to briefly recap the amendment and then ask for your vote. So there are 2 primary reasons why we need to do some adjustments in the 4th quarter of a given fiscal year to most effectively use the funding available to the MPO. The first relates to staff attrition and the time it takes to recruit and train new staff. When folks resign from CTPS, there may be a gap before a new person is hired in their place, and we do try to use and reallocate staff capacity as fluidly as possible to meet project needs, but staffing gaps can result in lower expenditures than initially expected on certain UPWP line items. In addition to staffing gaps, project or line item needs may evolve after the UPWP is developed. Initial budget estimates for each project that is included in the UPWP are developed in the spring, approximately 6 months before work commences, and really up to 18 months before this point. That allows the UPWP to be approved in the summer in advance of the start of the new federal fiscal year. But once work is in progress, needs or expectations may shift, and MPO staff can adapt to such changes. That can affect how much staff time or effort is needed for one project or line item versus another. And you will see all of this captured in the memo on Amendment 2 that is posted on the meeting calendar. So since July 21st, we received no public comments on this amendment. You may notice, if you read the memo very carefully, a change in the budget numbers for the Long Range Transportation Plan, or LRTP, in the amendment memo. The original number there was incorrect, and we have corrected it to the number at which the LRTP was programmed in the FFY 2022 UPWP, which is what it should have been. The net change in the amendment is the same. Effectively, the amendment is the same as it was on July 21st, just correcting that one number. So I am happy to take any questions, and if there are none, we would request that you endorse this amendment.
Thank you, Sandy. Any questions for Sandy? Seeing none, can I get a motion in a second to adopt this amendment as presented today? Eric Barassa.
I'll make a motion to adopt this amendment of the federal fiscal year 2022 UPWP.
Thank you. Brian Kane.
Brian Kane is only too happy to second that.
Motion has been made and seconded. Jonathan, please call the roll.
David Moeller,
Yes.
Marie Rose,
Yes.
John Romano,
John Romano, yes.
Laura Gilmore,
Yes.
Sarah Lee,
Sarah Lee, yes.
Eric Barassa,
Eric Barassa, yes.
Brian Kane,
Brian Kane, yes.
Leonard Diggins,
Leonard Diggins, yes.
Jen Rowe,
Jen Rowe, yes.
Joe Blankenship,
Joe Blankenship, yes.
Jay Monty,
Jay Monty, yes.
David Kozas,
David Kozas, yes.
Daniel Amstutz,
Daniel Amstutz, yes.
Heather Hamilton,
Heather Hamilton, yes.
Tom Bent,
Tom Ben, yes.
Jennifer Constable,
Jennifer Constable, yes.
and Peter Pelletier.
Peter Pelletier, yes.
Motion carries unanimous, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Jonathan. Next presentation is, next item is a presentation on upcoming federal certification review. And this is going to be by FHWA and FTA staff. Cassie, are you going first, or Leah? Are you going first?
Leah's gonna go first.
Whenever you're ready, Leah.
Morning. Thank you. So again, I'm Leah Sermon. I'm with the FTA Region 1 office here in New England. And Cassie and I just want to take this opportunity this morning to talk to you all about the upcoming ongoing federal certification review. So for those of you that have been around for a few years or longer with the MPO, this will seem familiar perhaps, but some of you may be new. So we wanted to take some time and just walk through the requirements and the process that we use, and then just update you on where we're at in that process. So the requirement in federal statute is that Federal Highway and Federal Transit Administrations jointly review and certify the transportation planning process for all urbanized areas that have a population over 200,000, which certainly includes Boston. And we're required to do that at least once every 4 years. So the Boston Region MPO process was last certified in the early part of 2019. So here we are 4 years later in the next cycle. The certification reviews are really about the process, and not just of the MPO, but the process as it's conducted by all of the core planning partners, the state DOT, the MPO, the providers of public transportation. And we look at the 3 C's, the continuous, cooperative, comprehensive aspects of the process. And to some degree, there is a compliance review part of it where we may identify corrective actions if there are areas that we've identified that aren't quite meeting the requirements. But we're also looking to approach this as an open dialogue and forum. This is a great opportunity for us to identify best practices that we can share with other regions, as well as to identify opportunities for improvements. And we often provide recommendations on things that we can be, we think can be changed and enhanced within your process. So as we're looking at the planning process, that's a pretty big topic. We do try to scope these and focus on each region a little bit differently, each cycle, really focusing on the risk areas and opportunity areas. Different topics we might review in more depth, different cycles of our review. So once we've narrowed down the scope, the federal team between Federal Highway and Federal Transit enter the review phase. We start with a desk review and then also do an on-site review. And this is how we gather all our information. We review your documents through 3C documents, as well as other MOUs and agreements and other documentation that is often we don't look at on an ongoing basis. We engage in Q&A, especially with the staff of all of the planning partners. And it's an opportunity for us to really hear directly what kind of work the MPO is doing. We can provide advice and guidance and just really get a good sense of how the process is working. And the other key input then is the public engagement, because there are the people who are working in the process, and then there are the people who have different perspectives. That it's really important for us to hear from the public and other stakeholders on your perspective on how the process is working. We'll also often do outreach directly to board members for that perspective on the process. So once we've gathered all this different input, we will, at the later part of the review, issue a report. And that report is what documents our observations and our findings. And that is how we make our final certification determination. So the process takes usually 6 to 9 months to go from start to finish. It is fairly involved. And then after we issue the report, there is still ongoing engagement as we work with all of our partners to implement recommendations, and certainly if there are any corrective actions, to resolve those in a timely manner. So that's just a nutshell of sort of the standard process. I'm going to turn it over to Cassie to talk a little bit more specifically about where we are in the current process for the Boston region.
Thanks, Leah. So as Leah mentioned, the process typically takes 6 to 9 months. We officially kicked off the Boston MPO certification review back in May. We are currently in the desk review phase, so the gathering of information. Thank you, Jonathan and staff, for putting together a very robust web link of information that we requested. We did appreciate that. The federal team reviewed it. We provided some questions, we asked some questions, and we received some responses back. So we're getting up to speed on gathering information, kind of learning more about the MPO processes, and all of that information we are going to use to develop the agenda, as Leah mentioned. So we're in the desk review phase. We're getting to the point where we'll be establishing the agenda. We have a federal team meeting coming up. We'll be fine tuning that. Topics that we may include at the MPO meeting include public outreach, organizational structure of the MPO. There likely will be a Title VI non-discrimination environmental justice component. We want to hear more about the TIP, MTP, how that's going, financial planning. So those are just some topics that are likely to show up and be discussed at the onsite. We are at this point planning to have an in-person onsite. We really find value in having that face-to-face interaction. So at this time, that is what we are planning for. And the dates that we have set, which we finalized just today, are Wednesday, September 28th and Thursday, September 29th. MPO members are invited to attend to hear that discussion. So we will be looking forward to that. And again, as Leah mentioned, as part of the certification review, we want to hear from the public. We want to hear, we want them to provide feedback and hear how they think the planning process is working in the region. So what we've discussed for public outreach for this certification review, it's going to include a couple different components. We do plan on coming to an MPO meeting and using kind of this venue to hear from public. I think, a lot of times you do get public input at these meetings, so we want to build on that. So we've coordinated, we will be attending the October 6th MPO meeting. We have reserved some time. Thank you, Jonathan, for allowing us to speak at the October 6th MPO meeting. And then also thank you to Len. We hope to attend the September 14th RTAC meeting and also use that meeting as a public forum to gather feedback. In addition to that, we are putting together an MPO board member survey. We want to hear from the MPO board members. We want to hear how things are going from your perspective. So last certification review, for those of you who were around for that, we did have formal interviews and got feedback that way. We're not going to go to that length this time, but we do really appreciate your feedback and want to target you and ask some questions. So we'll be sending that survey out, I think mid-September, just kind of asking some questions and hoping that you can respond and provide some opportunity, some feedback for us there. we're putting together a public notice that we'll be sharing through you guys shortly through Jonathan. And we're hoping for comments to receive by the public through October 14th. So we think that's adequate time. And Leah mentioned the final report. So all of this is wrapped up and concluded with a final report. We anticipate issuing that early calendar year 2023, probably February timeframe. And we will come back to the MPO and share our findings with you. So our report will detail all our observations, recommendations, corrective actions, that sort of thing. And we will kind of wrap that up and come back and share our findings so that you all are aware of what we put in the report. So that is all that we have. Thank you again for this opportunity to just kind of share with you the certification review process and timeline.
Yes.
I can just add, Mr. Chair, just so everyone sees in the materials for this meeting, there was provided a 2-pager, the Federal Certification Review handout, and that just has a brief explanation of what this process is as we just talked through it, but it also has Cassie and my contact information in there. And we do welcome you to submit comments to us directly via that contact information at any point. Again, we're hoping to get all comments pertaining to this review by October 14th so that we can use them to be informed as we're making our findings. Thank you.
Thank you both. Any questions from the members at this time? Seeing and hearing none. Next item on the agenda is the Safe Streets and Roads for All grant application. Rebecca Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rebecca Morgan, the Director of Projects and Partnerships for the Boston Region MPO staff. In this presentation, I'll be giving a brief overview of the Safe Streets and Roads for All grant program, a summary of the Boston Region MPO's plan to apply for the Safe Streets and Roads for All grant, the action plan grant, and we'll include a request for a vote to approve MPO staff and MAPC staff's plan to submit an application. Next slide, please. The Safe Streets and Roads for All grant is a discretionary grant that has been established as part of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, also known as the Infrastructure Investment and Job Act, or IIJA. It supports the National Roadway Safety Strategy and goal of 0 deaths and serious injuries on our nation's roadways. US DOT describes this grant as a roadway safety program with a strong equity component. Next slide, please. Safety and equity are essential to the mission of the MPO and are two of the major goals identified in Destination 2040, the MPO's long-range transportation plan. The Safe Streets and Roads for All program is also consistent with the work the MPO is already doing, including performance-based planning and programming. A regional safety action plan will build upon the work developed as part of these existing programs. Next slide, please. The Safe Streets and Roads for All program has allocated $5 billion in appropriated funds for the next 5 years, with up to $1 billion allocated for this year. The Safe Streets and Roads for All grant funds regional, local, and tribal initiatives to prevent fatalities and serious injuries on roadways, commonly referred to as Vision Zero or Towards Zero Death initiatives. Entities eligible for this grant program include MPOs, political subdivisions of states, tribal governments, and multi-jurisdictional groups. Next slide, please. There are 2 grants types being offered, an action plan grant and an implementation grant. The action plan grant is focused on developing a comprehensive safety action plan or supplemental action planning activities for those who may already have an action plan but aren't meeting the requirements. There's an implementation grant to implement projects or strategies identified in existing safety action plan, or to conduct planning and design or supplemental action planning activities for action plans that are relatively complete but may need a little bit of additional planning. In order to access implementation funds, a safety action plan is required. Next slide, please. MPOs are eligible for an award of up to $5 million for an action plan grant and up to $50 million for an implementation grant. There is a 20% local match required, which can include in-kind contributions or fundings from non-federal sources. Next slide. The proposed plan is for the MPO to apply for an action plan grant to fund the development of a regional comprehensive safety action plan. MPO staff and MAPC staff are planning to apply jointly on behalf of the MPO. If we are awarded these funds, we would develop a regional safety action plan. The regional safety action plan can then be used by the MPO jointly with municipalities or by municipalities independently to apply for implementation funds in future years. Next slide, please. A core component of the safety action plan is the leadership commitment and goal setting. In this case, a resolution from the MPO board with a stated publicly available commitment towards zero fatalities and serious injuries, or a significant reduction in fatalities and serious injuries by a target date with an eventual goal of zero deaths and serious injuries. Another major component is the planning structure, which includes the establishment of task force charged with oversight of the action plan development, implementation, and monitoring to ensure that the stated goals are being met. The task force would include a broad representation from the region, including municipalities representing the various geographic regions, representatives from advocacy and community groups, underserved communities, public health, and vulnerable roadway users. The safety analysis component includes equity considerations, such as which groups are more disproportionately impacted by crashes under the current roadway networks and the locations of higher risk corridors. It also includes a robust engagement strategy with an emphasis on underserved communities and populations. Based on the outcome of the analysis and engagement, policy and process changes needed for implementation are identified, and a comprehensive set of projects and strategies that will address the identified safety problems will be developed. Next slide, please. If the Boston Region MPO is awarded the action plan grant funds, the MPO will develop a comprehensive regional safety action plan. And as part of this planning process, the MPO board will be required to adopt a resolution committing to eventual goal of zero roadway fatalities and serious injuries. This goal must be associated with either one, a target date for achieving zero roadway fatalities and serious injuries, or two, an ambitious reduction of fatalities and serious injuries by a specific date with an eventual goal of zero deaths and serious injuries. The goals and targets will be based upon the planning efforts and recommendations from the Regional Comprehensive Safety Action Plan study efforts. Next slide, please. The Safety Action Plan will follow the Safe Systems Approach principles, which include significant cultural shift that treats roadway deaths as unacceptable and recognizes that humans make mistakes, and focus transportation system design operations on really lessening impact forces to reduce crash severity. Some examples of strategies that will be considered include identifying common risks across the network, quick build strategies to address regional safety needs, including quick build guides provide a framework for installing and evaluating low-cost safety projects, looking at high-risk locations, as well as identifying the high-risk locations. We wouldn't just look at crashes that are happening, but where there's really a risk for a fatality or serious injury, and looking to solve roadway safety issues systemically. There's also complete streets can be considered, converting a roadway corridor on a high injury network into a complete street with safety improvements to control speed and separate users, for example. There's programmatic support that can be considered, perhaps supporting group purchasing for materials for quick build design projects, including establishing an infrastructure library. Educational programs can be considered, conducting educational campaigns for new or innovative infrastructure, and data-driven solutions, perhaps implementing innovative data collection and analysis techniques and strategies, and integrating safety data across jurisdictions. Now, these are just some examples of what can be considered in the Safety Action Plan. The strategies and countermeasures will be developed based on the specific roadway safety problems identified as part of the planning work. Next slide, please. The application requirements for the action plan are relatively straightforward. The application includes safety, impact, and equity data, including the number of roadway fatalities, the 5-year average fatality rate per 100,000 persons, and the percentage population in underserved communities. It also includes a map of the Boston Region MPO, a 300-word narrative that would describe the MPO's planned approach, and an estimated budget for the development of the Safety Action Plan. We're currently estimating a budget of upwards of $2 million, with the majority of efforts planned to be undertaken by a consultant team. There's also a number of required forms that we will be submitting. Next slide, please. The selection will be based on 4 criteria. There are 2 safety impact criteria, roadway fatality count, and roadway fatality rate per 100,000 persons, which is really focused on looking at the concentration of risk. 1 criteria for equity, which is a % of population in underserved communities, and 1 criteria that will be the evaluation of the proposed approach with an emphasis on employing low-cost, high-impact strategies, community engagement, adopting innovative technologies and strategies, and focusing on evidence-based projects or strategies. Next slide, please. If the Boston Region MPO is awarded the Safe Streets and Roads for All grant, MPO staff and MAPC will procure consultant services to conduct the majority of the work to develop a regional comprehensive safety action plan with direction and support from the MPO staff and MAPC staff. MPO staff and MAPC staff tasks include grant administration, to include administering the funds and ensuring contract compliance, consultant procurement, developing the requests for proposal, reviewing submissions and selecting a consultant team, consultant oversight, directing and overseeing the consultant team's work to ensure that it meets the needs of the region, is consistent with the MPO's goals, and fulfills USDOT requirements for the grant. And then action plan coordination support, so coordinating with regional stakeholders and the MPO board, supporting a development of a task force, participating in community engagement and focus groups, providing data for safety analysis, supporting the establishment of goals, and reviewing consultant deliverables. Next slide, please. The Safe Streets and Roads for All grant is an opportunity to bring funds into our region to improve safety. By developing a regional safety action plan, we will strengthen the municipality's ability to apply for implementation funds in future years. It will help us reach our regional safety goals, as well as advancing safety projects on corridors with safety concerns across 2 or more municipalities, and facilitate coordination to create conceptual plans for those corridors. We'll also support a robust outreach and engagement with communities and help us toward our shared goal for safer and more equitable roads and streets. Next slide, please. We're in the process of finalizing the scope and budget for the action plan, incorporating recommendations that we've received through coordination with many of you, along with other regional stakeholders. Applications are due on September 15th, and the USDOT plans to announce the award recipients by the end of 2022 calendar year or early 2023. You can find more information on the Safe Streets and Roads for All grant program on the USDOT's webpage. Next slide, please. MPO staff requests at this point that the MPO vote to approve MPO staff and MAPC staff's plan to submit an application for the Safe Streets and Roads for All Safety Action Plan grant. And at this point, I turn it back to you, Mr. Chair, for questions, discussions, as well as a vote to approve submitting an application for the Safe Streets and Roads for All Action Plan grant. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. Questions for Rebecca? Brian Kane.
Thank you, Rebecca. Great, thank you. What sort of dollars would we be looking at potentially here? And also, would it be appropriate as part of the resolution or as part of the plan, assuming we get the plan, to suggest to the general court that perhaps Chapter 90 funding needs to be increased in order to meet the requirements of this whole process?
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Yeah, so first, I think your first question was around what we're thinking about in terms of the budget estimate for this effort. And where we are at now is we're upwards of $2 million. So we can, I mean, for MPOs where $5 million would be the limit essentially, and we're kind of at the midpoint of what they're suggesting. So somewhere between 2 and 2.5 million. For MPO staff, I mean, the majority of that work will be done by a consultant team. So there will be a percentage of that, which would be MPO staff. And at this point, it's in the hundreds of thousands for MPO staff. So probably something around $300,000 range for our efforts. And then your second question regarding looking to request increasing funds, I think that's certainly a strategy that can be considered. I mean, one of the things that we'll do as part of this planning effort is to determine what actually needs to happen in order to reach that goal. And so I would say that certainly would be part of the assessment that would be done as part of the planning activities.
Marie Rose.
Hi, thanks for the presentation. So if this is the MPO applying for these grants or this grant, is that correct?
Yeah, so the MPO in joint application with MAPC would apply for the grant.
And then how does that grant, is it spent just on planning and design activities? Are these sort of going to be infrastructure projects that end up being built, and who would be doing that?
Yeah, thanks for that.
I'm sorry, does it also include construction funding, or is it just planning and design and coming up with future projects?
Yeah, Marie, there are two grants that USDOT is offering right now. There's the Action Plan Grant, which is planning, which is the one that we're planning to apply for. And then there's an implementation grant, which is for implementation. So that would include, infrastructure changes and construction. In order to apply for implementation funds, you need to have a safety action plan, which meets the criteria that USDOT has laid out. So our intent would be to develop an action plan that would meet that criteria, so that in future years, implementation grant funds would be accessible to municipalities to basically receive those funds for those kinds of infrastructure changes.
And then do you know if those, for the implementation plan projects, if they are STIP projects that end up being advertised by the Highway Division, or would it be some other means, like through the municipalities, if you know?
I would imagine at this point, I think I would imagine it would be arranged depending on the specific project and what's required there.
I think Ken Miller has his hand up to answer this one. Ken, you want to answer this question?
As far as we know, the state will not be an eligible recipient even for implementation funding.
That's fine with me. I'm just wondering if the city or town gets the money that MassDOT has to advertise it, is what I'm concerned about.
Marie and I want to make sure that what your answer means is that the Federal Highway will do a direct grant to cities and towns who get the awards, and MassDOT will not be involved in any of the administration.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly what I'm getting. Thank you, David.
MassDOT cannot be a applicant or a recipient of the funds, but they can be a partner in the application.
Okay.
A partner as distinguished from an applicant, and a partner can be a private entity, a state DOT, or any other entity that can contribute funding. So if the state, for example, wanted to provide some funding for the match, or some private entity wanted to do that, they could be a partner in the application.
Yeah.
In terms of implementation, actually the MPO itself can get implementation funds, even though they are not an owner of a facility. You can be an implementer if you have certain responsibilities for safety within an area, or if the entity that owns the particular facility agrees to allow someone to do construction or implement the project. And again, recommendations may not just be construction. It could be signage, it could be education, it could be enforcement, it could be any one of a number of things that Rebecca spoke about in her presentation. Just something, it's a little complicated. We understand that, and we're trying to understand it too, but I think that's where it stands at this point.
Right. But just to be clear for Marie and I, the state is not eligible to be a recipient. Therefore, any awards under the program will not be given to MassDOT to administer, and no absent some side agreement. No MassDOT oversight of construction or design for construction projects.
That is correct. Now, whether an applicant can, like you said, can agree with you to do,
Yes.
I guess that's possible, but that's correct, David. The state cannot be a recipient, a direct recipient of the federal funds.
There may be applicants who want to do safety improvements on state-owned assets, and at that point, we would need to have some kind of agreement about MassDOT being in charge of construction, because we probably generally wouldn't let somebody else reconstruct our own assets. But that's for a future. Marie and I just want to make sure that everybody understands that if once we get beyond, none of this impacts what Rebecca's asking us to do today. But once we get beyond this, and Rebecca and everybody's action plan has made individual cities and towns eligible for construction grants or implementation grants, I should say. Once they go out and do that, they also then have to have the ability to actually work within the federal process, because they will be the implementers.
Right.
Correct.
Okay, cool.
Okay,
Jason?
well, I guess we'll.
Go ahead, Marie, I'm sorry.
No, we'll figure it out as we go along, because this has just started and right now. So this is just for the action plan grant, or the action plan grant, correct? That you're presenting on. Okay.
That's correct, yes.
All right. Okay, thank you.
Jason?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Sorry, having trouble with the camera today. Thank you for having me on. I spoke at the last MPO meeting regarding the Safe Streets grant, and I still have I have a question and a comment / concern. The town of Dedham is also going to be submitting an application for this grant, because we were thinking about this long before the grant even came about. The town was trying to be proactive and develop a local road safety plan. This came about and was an excellent opportunity to find funding to help us along with that, and not realizing that the MPO was going to do it. Great that the MPO is doing it, but at the same time, we know that it's probably not going to be as focused on individual communities as it would be if a community itself was to do an action plan for themselves. And one of the concerns that I have, and I believe Ken was on the last time, they're only anticipating about 6 awards per state based upon the total number. Go ahead, Ken, if you want to correct that. You're muted.
Thank you. Let's be clear. That was a number. I just did some math in my head real quick. There is no quota. There is no allocation by state. It all depends on the applications that are received. We in the Massachusetts division, we will not be evaluating. We may provide some input, but these decisions are not made at our level here in Massachusetts. And so we encourage everybody to apply. By the way, if you have something, a Vision Zero plan or a town safety plan, something, it doesn't have to be called a comprehensive safety action plan to qualify as one. If you have an existing plan that meets the required elements of a comprehensive safety plan, there is a worksheet that you can, a self-certification that you can submit that would allow you to request implementation funding even in this round. So
thanks, Ken. Thanks for the clarification.
Again, there's no quota. That number was just something off the top of my head. So I apologize. I'm sorry for saying it.
No, not a problem. Maybe you can answer the following question as well.
Yeah.
There was also an understanding that if the MPO was to submit an application and a community that's underneath the umbrella of the MPO submits an application, it's going to be considered duplicative, and the one that the local sent would probably be dismissed in favor of the MPO. Is that something that you're aware of as well?
No, again, we're not making the decisions. It's we are encouraging joint applications, like the one that, the MPO is considering. But there's nothing that, who knows? I guess I would encourage you to apply. And again, if you feel that you have a plan that meets the requirements, maybe you could apply directly for implementation funds now, because so maybe you could go for that.
No, we're not at that stage yet. We need to create that action plan, so we're going to be seeking that application itself. I just want to make sure that the MPO and whatever other towns and municipalities are doing separate applications, that we don't get pushed off as being duplicative. Obviously, if we don't get any funding I'm right in with the MPO. I want to help. I want to be part of a task force, whatever it may be, to help, probably for the following year, go for an additional grant to expand upon that action plan to make it more comprehensive to the town of Dedham before we do an implementation. That might be something that we have to do, but I just want to make sure that the MPO's application is not going to foul anything that a local municipality is going to do on their own. And I just want to make sure that. And then the question that I had was, should the MPO get awarded the grant, what is going to be used for that 20% match? Are you anticipating all in-kind services, or are you going to be coming to the individual communities under the MPO to ask for monetary assistance or in-kind services? Just kind of an idea of what you have there.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. I actually want to just address one thing. I know that the USDOT is encouraging joint applications. I think I just want to be clear that they are looking for joint applications, and I think they will be assessing the applications that are coming in from the same geography. And so I would say that. And secondly, if you do, we are both awarded, I think we should plan to coordinate those efforts. I think it would be important to make sure that Dedham, the town of Dedham is incorporated kind of in the regional plan, even if you do end up getting awarded for kind of an individual safety action plan. In terms of the 20% match, that's something that we've been having some conversations about. I mean, it can be in-kind services, as you mentioned. It's also any kind of non-federal funds can be used there. And I think we're looking at a kind of a combination, but I think we feel at this point pretty confident that the 20% match will be available. I don't know if Eric or wants to speak more specifically to that. Eric Barasa.
Yeah, well, I think we're also hoping that if we get awarded, that MassDOT will provide a portion of that 20% match as well. We don't have a commitment letter or anything like that, but I think we'll that will be our hope, and we'll cross that bridge if we get the award.
Other questions? Ken.
Just one more thing for those who are thinking about applying. The deadline is September 15th. No late applications will be accepted, from what we understand. And you do need to have been registered on grants.gov, and you also need to have something what's called a unique identifier, which replaces the DUNS number, which is no longer accepted. So if you're an organization that already had a DUNS number, you automatically have a unique entity identifier. But if you are an organization that did not have a DUNS number, you have to start that process of getting that unique entity identifier right away.
Other questions? So can I ask you one question back to Jason's point? I thought I heard on a webinar that Federal Highway ran that it was unlikely that both a regional applicant and a community within that region would both get awards. And I'm not saying that you would preference the regional application over the individual, but is that not true?
I would
unintentionally mislead Jason, and I know that I'm not asking you to make FHWA with policy. I'm really not. I just want to make sure that we're not misleading people accidentally.
I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
And thank you. But yes, I mean, if that's what you heard on the webinar, yes, we are encouraging joint applications. And they will be considering how things fit together in any if there's applications for similar kind of work within a region, but there are no absolutes, as you know, and so the worst that can happen is you apply and you don't get it, right? I mean, so I would encourage folks to apply.
Thanks, Ken. Chris Timmel.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to add a point there to what Ken was saying. So if multiple applications in the same geography come in, they both may get awarded, but USDOT reserves the right to come back to the applicants and have a conversation about the possibility of consolidating efforts. So I don't think it will be just you're not going to get awarded. I think there'll be a conversation and engagement from USDOT about both applications or multiple applications that come in.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions? Seeing none, can I get a motion and a second to approve MPO staff and MAPC staff's plan to submit an application on behalf of the MPO for the Safe Streets and Roads for All Safety Action Plan grant? Lynn Diggins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to make the motion to vote to approve the MPO staff and MAPC staff's plan to submit an application on behalf of the MPO for the Safe Streets and Roads for All Safety Action Plan grant.
Thank you. Eric Barassa.
Thank you. I'll second that motion.
Motion hasn't been made and seconded. Jonathan, please call the roll.
David Moeller.
Yes.
Marie Rose.
Yes.
John Romano.
John Romano, yes.
Laura Gilmore.
Yes.
Sarah Lee.
Sarah Lee, yes.
Eric Barassa.
Eric Barassa, yes.
Brian Kane.
Brian Kane, yes.
Leonard Diggins.
Leonard Diggins, yes.
I think Jen Rowe may have left along with Joe Blankenship. Logan, can you confirm?
Yep, they both stepped out.
Okay. Jay Monty.
Jay Monty, yes.
David Kozis.
David Kozis, yes.
Daniel Amstutz.
Daniel Amstutz, yes.
Heather Hamilton.
Heather Hamilton, yes.
Tom Ben.
Tom Benton, yes.
I know Darlene Nguyen has arrived. So Darlene, North Shore Task Force, Darlene Nguyen.
Yes, I stepped in at about 11 and I will abstain since I did not hear the full presentation.
Okay. Jennifer Constable.
Jennifer Constable, yes.
And Peter Pelletier.
Peter Pelletier, yes.
Motion carries, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Jonathan. Next item on the agenda is an update on staff structure. Tegan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I hinted at this final presentation in my report earlier in the meeting, but I just want to say hello again, and I'm very pleased to take some time today to provide you all with some information about the evolving structure of the staff to the Boston Region MPO, also known as the Central Transportation Planning Staff. And I want to say that since I took on the role of Executive Director of the staff in 2019, I want to emphasize again that we've completed a 5-year strategic plan for the staff. And related to that, we've made a number of changes in how we operate and in particular how we're structured. So they're all in line and relatively strategic in terms of how we've been engaging in that change. And the reason why I'm presenting today is that when I was providing an update on our first year of strategic planning activities back in March, one of you asked me to elaborate more on our staffing structure changes at a future MPO meeting. So this is that conversation. And so if we can go to the next slide. Today, what I'll do then is talk briefly about the context, the ongoing context for organizational changes. I will show you a graphic of the current structure of our staff, and I'll talk about the strategies that have led us to that structure, but that will also continue to guide our decision-making about our structure going forward. So next slide, please. So first, I'll refer back to what I mentioned, the strategic plan, which is our roadmap for our organizational change and the context for this change. And the strategic plan includes a goal that is specifically related to our structure and staffing, with the goal itself being to attract, reward, and retain a highly engaged, visible, and well-regarded workforce. And more specifically, in our first year of implementing the plan, we developed strategies related to the organizational structure and reporting relationship really to be able to improve the organizational effectiveness, encourage more collaboration across teams and groups, and better engage our staff in general, and particularly those managing the work at the agency in agency decision-making. Next slide, please. So a little bit more about the context of the structural change that we've been engaging in. Of course, hopefully it's relatively obvious that we've been in a somewhat tumultuous and less predictable time over the last few years in terms of recruiting and retaining staff. Specifically looking at state fiscal year 2022, we had about 13 departures of what varies between about 50 to 60 full-time staff. So that's a significant amount of turnover. 5 of those were retirements, and so those were relatively predictable, and we know we have a number of long-tenured staff. But we also saw 8 additional departures that were less anticipated, less known about in advance. We did hire 9 new staff last year, but as you can see from the numbers, that doesn't quite keep pace with the departures despite our efforts. If you can go forward one. An interesting outcome of this recruitment that's been going on over the last few years is that now more than 1/3 of our staff has been hired since the beginning of the shutdown resulting from the pandemic, meaning they've so far worked with us in a predominantly remote working environment. And we are shifting to more in-person work, but that does create a very interesting dynamic when over 1/3 of our staff have started primarily remotely. Next slide. So our current goal with our budget for the next federal fiscal year and the workload that we're planning is to have about 60 full-time staff in state fiscal year 2023. But at the end of August, we will still have about 52. And that's because even though we're continuing to recruit aggressively, we are also continuing to see more departures. So 4 of the departures we know are coming in August. 2 are retirements that we've already talked about. And we also talked last meeting about one of our managers, Mark Abbott, will be leaving us for position at MassDOT. And we have one new departure, which is Layla Azizi, one of our team who's been working on the travel demand model development. But this month, we've also had really great success in bringing on 4 new data analysts into our team, and we expect them to start just this coming Monday. So again, wins, but also some challenges in dealing with the level of turnover that we're experiencing. And our recruitment efforts are continuing. We currently have 3 positions posted and 4 more basically mapped out pretty clearly and anticipated over the next few months. We also have another 4 that we are kind of thinking about and expect to come in the next maybe 2 to 6 months, knowing that that number adds up to over 60. But again, this is a dynamic process because we'll see some additional retirements and likely some additional departures. So we kind of take it as we go in some of this case, but we're also doing some very specific planning, as you can see in the recruitments that are currently planned. I also want to highlight that we're not necessarily one-for-one replacing roles. First, many of the long-term, long-tenured staff that are retiring simply aren't replaceable one-for-one, but also with each departure, we're assessing and reassessing the needs of the agency as a whole, given the remaining staff and considering our future work. If you go to the next slide, this chart represents our staff structure of this month. And I know the text is a little bit small, and I'm happy to dig into this in any more detail with any of you in the conversation, but I can just highlight some aspects of where we are today in terms of our structure. Our work is now grouped into areas that are overseen by a single director. So if you look at the multicolored filled in blocks at the center of the slide, at the top, the Director of Policy and Planning is the director that oversees our staff most directly committed to the core MPO activities and documents and programs, as well as the logistics around these board meetings and committees. And that director's team is also overseeing the newly established it also includes the newly established communications and engagement team, which supports all the MPO activities, including managing the public engagement program plan, but also supports work across the entire agency. And then this director also oversees the teams of editors and graphic designers that also support our communications and engagement, and again, all the other work across the agency. And then next, We have the Director of Modeling and Analytics, who's overseeing a growing body of work, which is traditionally associated with our travel demand modeling. And that includes development and programming and analytics. And this team is a team of data scientists and data analysts. And we're in the process of restructuring that team, both to define and emphasize the core purpose of maintaining and supporting the travel demand forecasting tools, but also to research and develop new and supporting tools that we use in our planning work. So that team is in a process of evolution. And then we also, below that, have our Director of Projects and Partnerships, who you just heard from Rebecca prior to this presentation. And she oversees the staff that's performing the data analysis that supports our work across the agency, as well as the teams implementing the wide variety of different kinds of project work that we do, which includes our transportation design and analysis work, like our corridor studies for the MPO, and also our work for the MBTA, like our equity analyses. And then finally, the last block there and kind of grouping of work that I'll talk about is the Director of Finance and Operations, who oversees our IT finance and operational needs. One other thing I want to highlight on this graphic is that just because we have a box around an area of work on the right side of the graph doesn't mean that we have or need a manager overseeing the administrative, personnel, and budgeting functions of each of those work areas. And so our management structure, which I'll talk a little bit about the strategy in the next slide, is going to continue to evolve as we work through our strategic planning work. So note that right now, 7 of these areas of work are currently overseen by a manager, which is indicated by a star. So before we go to the next slide, I'll just highlight that this is a significant amount of change from the structure that existed when I started. And so I'm going to cover a few different strategies that guided us to this place. So next slide. So the first that I'd like to mention was to address the concern that I heard repeatedly at the start of my tenure here, which was concerns about bottlenecks created in workflows and decision-making through leadership. So we looked at our director team and elevated a Director of Finance and Operations and hired the Director of Modeling and Analytics, as I mentioned. And the result is we went from having 2 directors to 4 overseeing those areas of work that I just described. And then next slide. And then in addition, we've been restructuring our groups and teams overall and their managers, as I've already alluded to. One strategy has been to reorganize some of our staff based more on skill sets instead of the type of assignments they work on. So as an example, we used to have an independent transportation systems analysis group with its own manager, which was a few planners and analysts who specifically applied the travel demand model almost primarily to Mass DOT funded projects. And so now what we've done is we've expanded that group, reassigning some of the staff from other groups to make a larger data analysis and applications group, which has more flexibility as a whole as a team to work on a variety of projects and support the agency across all the different work that we do. So that's one example. Also, by reassigning teams, we've been able to sort of restructure our managers, as I mentioned, to have fewer managers overseeing more staff, more individual staff from the administrative, personnel and budgeting perspective. So we used to have 9 manager positions, and 2 of them had been vacant for some time or frequently vacant. And now we have a core set of 7 managers with those reorganized teams. And I will say this slide was made before Mark's departure was announced. So we do actually have a vacancy in the 7 managers now, and we'll assess the structure of the managers as we develop this job posting to follow up with that departure as well. So the main reason why we've been doing this, sort of looking at the teams and the management, is again to highlight making coordination more efficient and supporting sort of the better cross collaboration across the different teams. The next slide. Another big area of our strategy has been working to refine and clarify the roles that staff hold across the agency, largely through our development of a compensation guide, which provides career tracks throughout the agency. So for example, we've been creating clear expectations and definitions of what it means to be in a leadership role when you're technical staff in terms of being a chief or a lead role. So those roles are staff in those roles are responsible for really advancing the practice of their field at the agency, mentoring junior staff. And in general, it just sort of represents more growth opportunity for technical staff outside of the kind of the management track. And then on the second bullet, we've also been elaborating on our program manager roles. And those are the roles which are really core and necessary to carry out our essential required work. So ensuring that those roles are established and defined and standing so that we never sort of lose track of that core work and making sure that we're getting it done. And then we've also been providing more clarity on the differences between the roles and the expected skill sets of planners, data analysts, and data scientists, creating career tracks for all three. And then finally, in this sort of strategy area, I wanted to mention that we've been working also to reduce the highly specialized roles and classifications on our teams, such as the travel demand modelers, and we've reclassified them as data scientists and data analysts. And the idea is to make it more flexible in terms of how we can recruit and carry out our work. So finally, the last strategies I'd like to highlight, just the next slide, are around increasing transparency and engagement across the agency. So this is a little bit more general, I suppose, but I wanted to make a point that with our restructuring, we've been also intentionally increasing and restructuring how directors and managers coordinate with each other, with the intent of yielding more support for managers and better engaging them in the decision-making of the agency as a whole. And then in addition, we've been leveraging collaboration software and standardizing our processes and documenting our processes to make it easier to bring more staff into decision-making at the agency as a whole. So some examples of processes that we've been able to do that related to kind of improving our ability to be effective as an organization, increase collaboration and engage our staff has been the way that we've developed a compensation guide and hybrid work pilot guidelines with a lot of engagement and conversation with staff. We've also systematized our recruitment process and used, again, collaboration software to do that, so it makes it easier for all of the staff to navigate the process and for us to successfully carry out our recruiting more efficiently. And we've been engaging in an iterative process with managers and staff in revisions to our policies and procedures as a whole that guide our agency. So with that, if you go to the next slide, I'm happy to stop here, put the structure back up on the screen, and that is the end of my presentation, Mr. Chair, and I'd be happy to answer any questions or listen to comments that the board members or members of the public have.
Thank you, Tegan. Questions from members and or comments? Brian Kane.
Thank you. Just a comment, Tegan. Please keep up the great work. Reorganizing organizations that are well established is not easy, and I think you and Gene are doing a great job. Highly encourage you to keep going, and I found the responsiveness that I, as a relatively new member of this organization, have received from you and your team to be fantastic, and I just wanted to publicly state that and thank you for this presentation and encourage you to please keep going. Thanks.
Dan Clements.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, just to echo what Brian just said, I think I was probably one of the people that requested something like this several months ago. So I really appreciate the detail and the overview. I think it's really great and really helpful to understand kind of what's going on at the staff level to see how things are shifting and changing. And like Brian said, it's a big lift to sort of overhaul things, but I think they're doing a great job, and I really appreciate you coming and talking about it.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none. Thank you, Tegan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your comments.
Next item on the agenda is member items. Are there any? Seeing and hearing none, can I get a motion and a second to adjourn? And please state your name for the record of making the motion. Brian Kane, we'll go in reverse order this time.
I'm not sure I can do that. I guess I'll move to adjourn.
Eric Barassa.
Oh, I am so happy to second Brian's motion to adjourn. Great meeting today, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Motion hasn't been made and seconded. Without objection, we are adjourned. Thank you all very much. Bye, everybody.